Yo, what's up, nerds? It's MTG Man, and yes, I'm finally building a Sharpie cube. So today I'm gonna go over the first 70 cards I've gotten through. Some of them are gonna be vile. Let's be real. All right, so I'm building more for power than for comedy. All right, I've done comedy stuff before. Like a while ago, I did these whiteout cards because I got really bored. Yeah, I've done stupid stuff before, alright? I want to build for power, I want to make this interesting, and I've actually put a fair amount of thought into if I'm having strong Sharpie Cube cards, I need strong answers to deal with it. So that being said, sorry, my IRL setup is pretty vile. You can see the shit, but it's not great. So first up, we have Shrek Drake. So it's a 1 mana, 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, return a creature to its owner's hand. Basically, instead of having to return one of your creatures, you can just return anything. So it's just a solid-ish bounce spell. It's a master first pick. All right. Next up is Emo. So you search your library for a card, then shuffle your library, put that card in your hand, then draw 3 cards. So this is just a strong way to get whatever crazy ass threat is whatever you drafted, because I'm making this to be draftable. Next up is Liar IGN. So sure, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 0 or more life, you win the game. Alright, that's really solid. However, we can see, it's 6 mana, so it's not really it's that nuts. It's just pretty strong, alright? As long as you're not dead, you win. Next up is Ben. So Ben, you can tap to create a 1/1 human, and he also just gives all your creatures +2/+2. It's making a mediocre ability just way better, alright? It's gonna bump up your whole board. It's gonna be a general threat, because here's the thing, right? Sure, we have general threats like that where it's going to bump up the board and it's going to be a problem for your opponent, but then you also have big problems where you have this right here is Ian, and at the beginning of each end step, gain control of all permanents. So unless your opponent can destroy Ian by the end step, Ian just steals all their shit. There's nothing they can do about it. So we're making these insane threats, but we also have to make sure there's good answers to them. Next up is Don. I really think it's funny just giving cards regular people names. So when it enters, you destroy 3 permanents, and then for each permanent put into a graveyard this way, you just create a 3/3 elephant. So it puts 18 power on the board, but you're paying 8 mana for it. Which does seem wow, that's a pretty big cost. However, things get a little bit problematic. One of the strongest cards is Chance of the Tang, which you can just reveal from your hand, and if you do, you add green to your mana pool. There's no limit on how much you can do this. You can just keep adding green, so this is an infinite green source. This might be what you search out with Emo, alright? It's finding ways to make these cards incredibly strong without adding any new text. Next up is Scabinator. Sometimes I think about changing up the arts on these. I think I might draw a Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Nader on this shit. But as an additional cost to it, you exile 3 creatures. And you can cast it from your graveyard. And it's a flying 5/6. So this is a general threat. It removes 3 creatures from the field, and you can cast it from your graveyard. This is a really good answer, but it's also a solid threat. Next up is Hexgold Slith. I haven't decided whether to change the name on this one or not, but it just says you get 2 energy whenever it attacks, and then whenever it deals damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It also has First Strike. It's kind of just a 2-drop creature. I think I'm gonna add more energy abilities to my cube to see how crazy I can make it. Because if we can just take a card and cross off you know how a lot of energy cards will have pay so much energy to do one thing, and then when it enters you get this much energy? If we just cross everything in between, it could be when this creature enters you get 8 energy. It could be something nuts like that. So just trying to figure out ways to make things busted. Next up is Dang Thief. So when Dang Thief becomes tapped, you can exchange a permanent you control and a permanent an opponent controls. This can just steal something of your opponent's that's like really important to their game plan. You could steal Ian. I don't know how you would get Dang Thief out if Ian's already out, but next up is Imp. You just look at your library and then put them into your hand. As long as you have a way to win, you probably just won. But if you go to next turn without winning, you have no cards in the library and you lose the game. Extremely powerful, but if you can't do anything, there's major downsides. Next up is Colt. You just exile an artifact or creature, and then create a 4/4. It's good removal, and it's giving you a body. It's just the most it can possibly do. Next up is Lame Gecko. When it enters, you add black-red, and then for 1 and a red, you can draw a card. On the weaker side, however, this is just going to let you continuously draw cards and keep your hand pretty full. Next up is Iran. So when it enters, you exile all cards from your graveyard until it leaves the battlefield, and then you can pay 1 and a white and tap it and cast a spell from exile without paying its mana cost. Because it's just from exile, this could be one of your opponent's spells as well. Clam the Firstborn. You just gain control of a creature, untap it, and it gains haste. This is a permanent gain control. It's a very strong way to basically take whatever your opponent's best thing is, since your opponent is going to have a lot of good shit. Pughammer. So when it attacks, you put a stun counter on a permanent. That could be one of your opponent's lands. That could be their creature. And either way, it's just a 3-mana 6/6. So it's not really going to hurt either way. Boring one. Nipper is just a 2-mana Death Touch lifelink creature. This might get cut. Basically, how this came about is I just went into my game store and said, give me a bunch of cards. And they did. So, that's what I'm working with at this point. Thin Man. So, whenever Thin Man or another creature you control dies, put a 2/2 black zombie onto the battlefield. The interesting thing about that is that zombie could then also die and then get another trigger. So basically you have infinite creatures or like infinite sacrifices if you have some sort of sacrifice outlet. Next up is Anal, because I thought it was funny. When it enters, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal 1 card from among them, put that card on top of your library, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order. It's not great. It's card selection. There's only so much I could do with it. But it's also just like an okay mana rock. Next up is Lurgroif. So its power is equal to the number of cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number plus Lurgroif words, which just means the amount of words on Lurgroif. I made a little note there. There's 31 words on Lurgroif, including like the text at the bottom. So its toughness is 31 plus the number of cards in all graveyards. So it's just a really strong 4-drop, Next up is Thought Talk Lock. I just thought it was like a silly little name. But anywho, when it enters, you choose an opponent, they reveal your hand, you choose a card from it, they discard that card, and then they discard a card. You'll notice there's a good amount of hand disruption because there's so many powerful things. Like, if your opponent has Chance of Tang in their hand and they're just creating infinite green mana, you need ways to get rid of that. Next up is Zoa. I just made it Zoa because that's the name of a Yu-Gi-Oh creature. I need to get rid of the Chrono right there, but when it's put into a graveyard, you put 2 tokens into play that are copies of it. This includes milling it, discarding it, and I would believe the tokens also have the same ability, so you can just, flood your board with them. You'll notice I really don't like changing the mana cost of cards. I think that's kind of cheating to just make cards cost less. I really want them to cost the same, but we change their abilities to make them more strong. Right here is Boner, which you can tap to draw 3 cards. It's just a black 1-mana 1/1 that you can tap to draw 3 cards. Pretty solid, alright? If this was ever released, that would just break the game. Next up is Za Cave. So Cave, you can pay 3, tap it, and search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. I generally also don't like changing the cost of abilities. There's very rarely circumstances I do that, because I just think that's like an integral part of what the card was. And sure, I could just make it be a free, search your library for a land. You could do it infinitely and it would be nuts, but I still want there to be some sort of balance in the metagame. So next up is Gengar, like the Pokemon. It's got flying and sacrifice a creature. Return each creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Those creatures are vampires in addition to their other types. Sure, that's broken, but it's 5 mana. That's my defense. There's nothing else. You'll notice this is one of the few chances where I got rid of a mana cost. I just went and made this cost the cost for that. I just changed it up. I thought it was cool. Next up is Boop. So you create a treasure token, and then it deals 2 damage to target creature, and then it deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. Very straightforward, basically a 1 mana lightning bolt, shock, and it's 1 mana because you create the treasure, but whatever. Here's one I might cut because it's just not that broken. Losing Men just costs 2 less, so it's 1 white black, and destroys a creature or planeswalker, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. I think it's probably not as good as it could be, but it was one of the first cards I changed, so I've just kept it so far. Dig Through Tim, so you look at the top 7 cards of your library, and then put them into your hand. It's definitely a worse version of Imp, and you have to make sure you have cards to delve with it, but it's still pretty strong. It's a 2 mana draw 7, pretty bad. Next up is Rum Visionary. When Rum Visionary enters, you draw a card, then scry 6. Scrying 6 is strange, because that's theoretically really good, but it's also not really any more cards in hand, so hopefully it replaced itself with something that'll draw you more cards, but you'll see. This is Baral's Tie. So you return up to 3 artifacts or creatures to their owner's hand, and then you can cast a card from your hand without paying its mana cost. This is probably how you're gonna cheat out something big like my boy Don. I don't think you're casting Don. I think you're either getting Chance of Tang or you're playing Baral's Tie. Sorry about that. I got a dog. He's really annoying. But I love him. This is Thrill of Posse. It's just a 2 mana draw 2. It could be better. Next up is Pie. So when Pie or another permanent enters the battlefield, you draw a card. And then whenever a player casts a spell, draw a card. And then when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So there's no real good way of removing it. It's just going to keep drawing you cards. The only thing is you might just die if you're not playing enough cards. Next is Runaway. You choose creatures controlled by players and return those creatures to their owner's hand. So it's like a one-sided board wipe, essentially. Very strong, very, very good option. Next up is Fact. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library, separate those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. You're probably going to put 5 to hand, but there are things like maybe you want to put Zoa to the graveyard so you can get 2 copies of it, something like that. Or you want to fill your graveyard for Lorgoy, for whatever. It's just giving you options. Next up, this is the only time I've changed text, and that's because I wanted to make the U and O so that it's Rim Booty. But you just destroy a creature or planeswalker and create a dragon. When I'm making these, since it's a cube and it's gonna be drafted, I'm just gonna put 4/4 dragon tokens, in the pack along with any other tokens that are necessary, so that we just know that's what a dragon is. Next up is Hard Finn. Finn is the hardest man I know, but he has flying, and creatures, or whenever a creature you control deals damage, you can put a 1/1 blue Thopter creature token with flying into play. just creates you a bunch of tokens, might win you the game. The tokens will keep doubling because that's not combat damage, that's just any damage. So, you know, you are dead. It's a 1 mana, destroy target creature, draw a card. We just need consistent removal for these big-ass threats. Another way you might get something big in is Flash. You just put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That's it. Nothing else to it. Very simple. Birth is a 3 mana, choose a permanent in your graveyard, put it onto the battlefield, and gain 3 life. It's a really strong reanimation spell. Fog Bank becomes Bank, and it's just a 2 mana, prevent all damage, which means it can't be removed with damaging spells. So unless the opponent has some other way to remove it, you basically can't die from combat. Next up is Ale Moon. Until end of turn, if a player taps the land for mana, it produces colorless mana instead. I haven't really made too many artifacts, so your opponent's probably fucked if their lands are being colorless now. The only problem is they could probably just tap all their lands in response, but you know, who thinks about that, right? This is a lad. So whenever you cast a spell, you can put a charge counter on Lad, and when Lad deals combat damage, you draw X, where X is the number of charge counters on it. Lad is just a good draw outlet. Lad's a good guy. Next up, this is Ted. So when Ted enters, you put 4/4 1/1 blue fairies with flying onto the battlefield, and you can pay 1 green to regenerate Ted. He's also a 4 mana 8/4, so he just like puts 12 power onto the battlefield for 4 mana. You know, a very consistent beat stick. Next up is Worth It. So whenever you cast a spell, create a 1/1 human. Probably the best way to flood the board, essentially. Next up is Less Puns. I hate puns. When so it makes target opponent lose 5 life, then they discard 2 cards, sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and then you repeat that process 1,000 times. So this wins you the game. This is one of those things you want to get out of your opponent's hand, or you want to counterspell for. I haven't made any counterspells yet. If you don't get one, you're fucked. Next up is Blot. So Blat, just the owner of target permanent shuffles into their library, and then you draw 2 cards. It's a good removal spell and a good draw outlet for 3 mana. Provide, so you can just reveal it from your hand and your life total becomes 26. This isn't at sorcery speed, so you could just do this in response to like hitting 0 life. So as long as it's in your hand, you can't die. That's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I like not dying. Next up is Late. It's just a 1 mana exile target permanent. This is the kind of removal you need when things are getting out of hand. Next up is EA. Pretty boring. It's just a first strike flying 2/1 green creature. I just thought it was interesting to give green flying. I don't think it's really good. I just thought it was interesting. It was in the pile, so I did it. My bad. And then these cards, I haven't really changed the name for any of these. So this is Duress. You just target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a card from it, that player discards that card. This is how you get rid of Provide or Chance of Tang or anything like that. Aggressive Sabotage, and if you have any good names for any of the cards that don't have their names changed, let me know in the comments. But target player discards 2 cards and then it deals 3 damage to that player. Also, you add red as you cast this spell, so it only really costs 2 mana. Next up, Doomblade is just destroy target creature. I think I might cut Doomblade just because there's other more consistent removal, like Cut Down, which just says destroy target creature. I think kill spells can get kind of boring, so I think I'm gonna need to look through bulk boxes to try and find more interesting versions of kill spells. Next up is Lightning Bolt. I haven't changed the text, but it has Storm now. That's right. We just gave Lightning Bolt Storm. We thought Grape Shot was good. Lightning Bolt with Storm. Way better. I think that's going to be a really good kill spell and a really good burn option and just a really good everything. So Bandit's talent, when it enters, each opponent discards 2 cards. And then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or few cards in their hand, they lose. Here's the thing. I usually don't like changing loses life to loses, as in loses the game, because I think that's kind of broken. However, in this case, that's your opponent's fault. If they don't have cards in hand, that's their fault. They can suffer. And then at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each card in hand. So you just double your hand size, basically. Furnace Hellkite. So I removed the mana cost. But we're kind of doing like the Asmoran and Mordecai to Syndicaldekar thing, where like Asmo is just if you've discarded a card, you can pay black and red to play it. Here the case is this spell costs 1 to cast for each artifact you control. Spoiler, there isn't that many artifacts, so it's probably going to cost 0, and it's just going to be a 0 mana 5/5 flyer. So that's pretty good. I would say that's pretty good. Solitary Confinement, so at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you draw. So it's just an extra draw, and you have Shroud, and prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So your opponent needs to find removal for this. I think I'm going to make sure there's more, like, regular, any permanent removal, just to make sure it's not a problem. Soren's Guide, so when it enters, you search your library or graveyard for a card and put it into your hand. This is just a consistent tutor. This is Chance of the Tang. This is, Provide. This is any card that's going to either help you win the game or not lose the game. Next up is Containment Priest. If a creature would enter the battlefield, exile it instead. This just kind of fucks over both players, but is there really a better Floodgate than just no creatures for either player? I didn't think so. Hixus Prison Warden, so has Flash, and whenever a creature deals damage to you, exile that creature until Hixus leaves the battlefield. I think I might Sharpie out, just exile that creature, just so it's just gone forever. I just thought it was an interesting card. Fun fact. I actually own a sealed version of the Hixus deck. I got it because... So it's basically like the first deck my friend got like 8 or 9 years ago when he started playing. And we don't really even talk anymore, but I just like saw it a while ago. It didn't actually cost $20. They were charging more for it, which I know was a scam because the cards in here suck. But like for nostalgia, I just have it sealed and like sitting on, it's on my counter. Sneaky Snacker. So when you draw, you return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I think I'm going to remove tapped. I just realized it's probably a good change. Season the Bold. So you choose up to 5 modes, and then you can choose the same mode twice. And you can create a treasure, exile the top 2 cards of your library, you can play them, and whenever you cast a spell, it deals damage to up to 1 target. So this is a really good win con, because every spell is now also a shock. Or, hear me out, you can make every spell 5 shocks, because you can choose the same mode 5 times, and just, like, cast 2 spells and you win the game. It's a little nuts, but it costs 5 mana, so I think that balances it out. I've kind of balanced this whole thing around turn 5. That's about when I think everybody should be winning. Unless there's a good amount of removal happening, turn 5 is when the game ends. Chancellor of the Spires, you can reveal this card from your hand. If you do, you may cast target card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. This seems a little busted. However, early game, when there's nothing in the graveyard, this doesn't matter. So, it's, like, it only really matters when there's stuff in the graveyard. As long as you don't have a repeatable instant or sorcery in your graveyard that your opponent can, abuse with this, it doesn't... It's to be seen. It's to be seen. See the Unwritten, so you reveal your library, and you can put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, and then if you control a creature, you can put 2 creatures onto the battlefield instead of 1. Then last up, Emberheart Challenger. Haste, prowess, and when it becomes the target of a spell or ability, exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card. Just a consistent attacker. Doesn't, not overpowered, nothing crazy. So I'm about 70 cards in. I think I'm gonna do probably 300. I think probably 300. But again, so Sharpie Cube's big right now. And I'm trying to work on like a certain type of balance, because I think that having cards like Ben, that just does something crazy, or like Liar IGN, that like can just win you the game. I think that's part of the spirit of the format, right? I think there's a fun amount of like stuff happening there. However, like if I didn't change Chancellor of the Spires like this, I could have changed it so that you can just reveal it and make your opponent mill 7 over and over, so that they would lose turn 1, right? I'm not trying to make turn 1 losses. I think that's a boring thing to draft, right? I'm shooting around turn 5, turn 6. If you'll notice, like, the big spells, Season the Bold that wins you the game, turn 5. See the Unwritten, turn 6. And even, like, some of the answers to stuff, like Hixus will, get rid of creatures and shit, that's turn 5. Less Puns, turn 5. Hard Fin, it's turn 6, and maybe it's one of the weaker of the win cons, but again, it's doing what it needs to on its turn. Gengar bringing everything back from the graveyard, turn 5. Lehurgoyf being super huge, turn 4. So it's that like turn 4, 5, 6 when things should really be heating up. And sure, there's ways to accelerate the game. There's cards that like go outside the curve and are probably a bit too strong. But the amount of removal is also going to be pretty consistent. When you can just pay 1 mana to destroy a creature, when you can just pay 1 mana to exile a permanent, you can pay 3 mana to exile or to shuffle a permanent into its controller's library, and then draw 3 cards. You just need to have a consistent amount of balance, because yes, I'm making this to be nutty, but I'm also making it to be balanced. But that's it. That's the 70 cards I have done right now. I'm probably going to upload this and then just start working on more, because I really want to get this whole thing done. I want to get it sleeved up. I'm trying to figure out if it's more fun to do just whatever cards I think are interesting, or if I want to do like 50 red, 50 green, 50 blue, 50 white, 50 black, and then 50 colorless or something. Or if I want to do lands, like how do I want to make this draftable besides just you're playing basics? But that's it. That's the Sharpie Cube I've been working on. Let me know if you think there's any big changes that could be made to any of these cards. Let me know if you have any fun names. And yeah, this has been MTG Man signing off, and I will see you next time. Hopefully the IRL setup will be better next time, because this is garbage. Bye.